I didn't feel joyful. I was scared. I was afraid. And it wasn't anxiety. They were like panic attacks.
Yeah.
Which are different.
Goldie Hawn was never quite as innocent and carefree as Hollywood wanted everyone to think. Behind her famous laugh, her bright smile, and her easygoing presence on screen was a woman who never forgot when someone treated her badly. She remembered every insult that was hidden behind a joke, every time someone mistook her kindness for weakness, and every moment when a man thought she wouldn't stand up for herself. When Goldie remembered these things, she didn't get angry or make a scene. Instead, she simply walked away and never looked back. For many years, Goldie played the Hollywood game better than most people in the industry. She laughed off problems, kept everyone calm on movie sets, and protected the feelings of people who probably didn't deserve her protection. But some things that happened to her never went away, and the men who crossed certain lines with her learned an important lesson the hard way. Goldie Hawn might have seemed gentle and sweet, but she never forgot what people did to her. The first person who ended up on her private list of people to avoid turned what should have been a fun comedy movie into something much more difficult. That person was Chevy Chase. When they started filming a movie called Foul Play back in 1978, it seemed like a perfect match. Goldie was known as America's sweetheart, and Chevy Chase was considered one of comedy's brightest stars. Everyone expected them to work well together, and on camera, they did look good together. But when the cameras stopped rolling, things got bad very quickly. Chevy Chase showed up on set with an attitude that made everything about him. He constantly changed things without asking, not because he wanted to make the movie better, but because he wanted to be in control of everything. He rewrote his lines whenever he felt like it, refused to do takes that he didn't approve of, and made fun of scenes that didn't focus enough attention on him. People who worked on the crew remember how the whole mood would change whenever they stopped filming. What looked fun and playful on screen became uncomfortable and tense behind the scenes. Goldie tried her best to keep everything running smoothly. She made jokes, encouraged everyone, and absorbed all the tension so the crew members wouldn't have to deal with it. But even someone as patient as Goldie has limits. Chase apparently got upset whenever Goldie got bigger laughs from people, and he didn't like it when attention moved away from him. He was rude to crew members, questioned what the director was doing in front of everyone, and treated the whole experience like it was a competition that he had to win. At one point, someone working on the crew heard Goldie whisper to a stylist that Chase wasn't funny when the cameras weren't rolling, and that he was actually just cruel. As time went on, it became harder for Goldie to hide how much she disliked working with him. Chase made insulting comments about Goldie's cheerful image and openly questioned whether she was actually smart enough to do comedy, even though she was already one of the most successful and profitable stars in all of Hollywood. He reportedly told a producer that Goldie was lucky to be working with him, and that comments spread through the crew and made everyone uncomfortable. By the last few weeks of filming, Goldie and Chevy only spoke to each other when they absolutely had to for the movie. Goldie started asking for separate rehearsals just so she wouldn't have to be around his negative energy. The whole set became tense and divided, and everyone was exhausted. People were careful about what they said and did, just counting down the days until filming was finally over. When the movie came out and did well, the studios immediately wanted to make sequels and have them work together again. Goldie refused without any hesitation. She didn't negotiate, she didn't consider it for old time's sake, and she didn't give him a second chance. Her agent made it very clear that she was not interested in working with Chevy Chase again. That silence became permanent. There were no friendly interviews where she talked about him, no nostalgic stories about the old days, just distance. As far as Goldie was concerned, Chevy Chase was finished in her world. The next man on her list didn't try to ruin a film. Instead, he tried to control her. That man was Warren Beatty. During the 1970s, Warren Beatty wasn't just powerful in Hollywood, he was considered untouchable. He was charming, well-connected, and used to having women pay attention to him and want to be around him. When he decided he was interested in Goldie Hawn, he assumed she would react the same way as other women had, and that she would be flattered by his attention. At first, Warren played the role of the charming suitor. He sent invitations, gave compliments, and touched her in ways that he framed as innocent flirtation. Goldie stayed polite, but she made it clear she wasn't interested. She knew all about his reputation. She had watched other actresses get pulled into his world only to be thrown away when he got bored with them. She turned him down gracefully more than once. That's when Warren's behavior changed. Beatty wasn't used to being rejected, especially not by someone he quietly thought of as less important or less serious than other actresses. People who knew what was happening say that his charm quickly turned into quiet revenge. Goldie's name started to be mentioned differently in important meetings and conversations. People began making comments about her being unreliable, too focused on comedy, and not serious enough for important, dramatic work. Nothing was dramatic or obvious, and nothing could be traced directly back to Warren, but just enough doubt was planted in the right people's minds to cause problems for her. Important meetings started disappearing from her calendar. Scripts that she had been promised seemed to stall and never move forward. Invitations to important Hollywood gatherings stopped coming. It wasn't enough to end her career completely, but it was a slow squeezing of her opportunities designed to remind her who held the real power in Hollywood. Goldie recognized what was happening immediately. She never called Warren out publicly or fed gossip to tabloids and reporters. When someone asked her if she would ever work with him, she answered simply that she didn't mix business with power games. In private, she was more direct about it. A former assistant remembered her saying that Warren doesn't handle rejection well and that he punishes women who reject him, and punish her he did. Years later, at an awards ceremony, Beatty walked up to Goldie like nothing had ever happened between them. He had the same smile and the same confidence as always. Goldie smiled back at him, then turned around and walked away without saying a single word. A journalist who was standing nearby muttered that Goldie's smile could freeze hell itself. From that moment forward, Warren Beatty's name became an absolute no for Goldie. If studios suggested working with him, Goldie shut it down immediately. She was calm, certain, and final about it. The next man on her list didn't try to charm her or quietly undermine her career. Instead, he tried to humiliate her in public. That man was Dustin Hoffman. The casting room was small and intimate, with just a few producers, a casting director, and two established stars reading lines opposite each other. Goldie Hawn had been invited to audition for a serious dramatic role, which was a chance for her to show a different side of herself beyond the comedy she was known for. Dustin Hoffman was already attached to the project. At first, the reading seemed to be going well. Then Hoffman suddenly stopped in the middle of a line. He looked directly at Goldie and said flatly that she wasn't connecting with the material. The whole room tensed up. Then he turned to the producers and added with a smirk that she was still playing it like a sitcom. Some people in the room laughed nervously, others stayed completely silent. Goldie felt the humiliation wash over her immediately. This wasn't him trying to direct her or collaborate with her to make the scene better. This was him showing dominance, delivered clearly and publicly. Hoffman wasn't trying to help the scene at all. He was asserting control and showing everyone in the room who was in charge. Goldie finished the reading. She stayed calm, focused, and professional, but something inside her had changed. The next day, she withdrew from the project entirely. There were no negotiations and no request for a second audition. She told her agent that she would not fight to be taken seriously by men who had already decided she was just a joke. Offers came in to try to smooth things over and convince her to reconsider. She refused all of them. Behind the scenes, word spread quickly about what had happened. Hoffman hadn't exposed any limitations in Goldie's abilities. He had exposed his own behavior. What he framed as intense dedication to his craft felt to Goldie like cruelty disguised as method acting. It wasn't about the craft or passion for the work. It was about control. Years later, she addressed what happened indirectly in an interview. She said that some men in the industry forget that they're not directing the women around them in real life. People who were close to her knew exactly who she was talking about. That moment stayed with her not because she lost a role, but because for a brief second it made her question herself and her abilities. And to Goldie, that was the real injury. she never worked with Dustin Hoffman again. By this point, a pattern was impossible to ignore. Goldie didn't fight wars with people. She set boundaries, quiet ones that were permanent. Men who mistook her warmth and kindness for weakness learned that lesson only once. Because when Goldie Hawn closes a door on someone, she doesn't just slam it shut. She removes the entire door so it can never be opened again. The next man on Goldie Hawn's list didn't humiliate her in a casting room or quietly spread poison about her around the industry. He did something that was arguably worse. He made disrespect sound like it was just comedy. That man was Bill Murray. Bill Murray showed up late to the table red for a project they were supposed to do together. He offered no apology and no explanation for being late. He just made a loud entrance, dropped a half-finished coffee onto his script, and wore a smirk that suggested everyone else in the room was already boring him. The project was a comedy from the late 1980s that was built around improvisation and charm. On paper, it looked like it would be a perfect match. Goldie Hawn and Bill Murray working together seemed like a dream pairing of two comedy legends. Studio executives were already imagining how successful it would be. Goldie knew within just a few minutes that something was seriously wrong. Murray started tearing through the script like it was something that annoyed him. He made fun of lines, rewrote dialogue while they were reading it, and ruined emotional moments with cheap jokes that were aimed at getting attention rather than serving the story. The writers sat frozen in their chairs as years of their work were turned into punchlines and jokes. At first, Goldie tried to go along with it. She smiled politely, adjusted her timing, and hoped that the chaos would eventually settle down. It never did. Halfway through reading a scene, Murray turned to Goldie and said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, that maybe she should try acting like she had done dramatic work before. Laughter followed his comment, the kind of laughter that always happens when powerful men decide that being cruel is the same thing as being clever. Goldie didn't laugh. During the break, she closed her script and quietly left the room. There was no confrontation and she didn't raise her voice. The next day, her team informed the producers that she was out of the project. There were no conditions and no negotiations. In private conversations, she was very clear about her reasons. Murray didn't confuse being unpredictable with being brilliant. He turned unpredictability into a weapon. To Goldie, his style wasn't creative freedom. It was emotional laziness disguised as genius, a way to dominate every room while pretending it was all about art. The studios tried to patch things up between them. Money was offered to convince her to come back. Apologies were hinted at, but never quite delivered. And Goldie refused every single attempt to change her mind. She wasn't angry about what happened. She was simply done with that situation and with him. After that experience, she made a decision that changed the direction of her entire career. She would do no more buddy comedies built around difficult men. She would do no more movie sets where she had to absorb chaos and negativity so that other people could shine. Years later, when someone asked her why she had turned down so many comedy projects that were led by male stars, she answered with just 2 words. She said she chose peace. The next man on her list didn't hide behind jokes or improvisation. His cruelty was sharper and colder, and it came dressed up as moral superiority. That man was Sean Penn. It happened at a charity event in Malibu. The room was filled with industry elites, donors, cameras, and applause that happened on demand. Goldie Hawn was there to speak about mental health and mindfulness, which was a subject that was deeply personal to her. She wasn't there to promote a movie or sell an image of herself. She was speaking from her own real experience. Before Goldie even reached the stage to give her speech, Sean Penn was already showing signs of being restless and dismissive. Guests who were sitting nearby later said they remembered him rolling his eyes and muttering comments under his breath. He was mocking the whole idea of what he called another celebrity wellness sermon. A few people laughed nervously at his comments. Most people stayed silent and uncomfortable. Goldie delivered her speech in a calm manner. It was vulnerable, thoughtful, and honest. The applause when she finished was warm and genuine. As she stepped down from the stage, Penn leaned back in his chair and made a scoffing sound that was loud enough for several tables of people to hear clearly. He said that she should stick to giggling. Goldie didn't react to his comment in the moment. She smiled politely, raised her glass in a toast, and left the event early. In the car ride home that night, Goldie broke down, but not out of embarrassment. She broke down out of pure exhaustion. She was decades into her career at this point. She had won awards, had real influence in the industry, and had proven her depth as a person and as an artist many times over. And yet she was still being reduced to a stereotype by men who confused cynicism with intelligence. That night changed something fundamental in how Goldie approached certain people. From that point forward, Sean Penn became someone who simply didn't exist in her world. There would be no interviews together, no joint appearances, and no polite small talk at industry events. When someone asked her about him later, she offered a very short answer. She said he was not her energy. In private, she was more direct about her feelings. Friends remember her saying that activism without empathy is just another form of ego. Penn's intensity wasn't based on real principles in her eyes. It was performative, and she had no interest in being collateral damage for someone else's self-importance. The final name on her list wasn't a co-star or a peer who was trying to dominate her. It was something quieter, heavier, and far more unsettling in its own way. That person was Kirk Douglas. Goldie Hawn had always respected legacy and history. She understood what it meant to work in an industry that was built by giants who came before her. And very few names in Hollywood carried more weight and respect than Kirk Douglas. But having respect for someone didn't mean she had to feel comfortable around them. Douglas never insulted Goldie directly or outright. He never raised his voice at her. His dismissal of her came wrapped up in old-school charm. He gave exaggerated greetings, lingering looks, and made comments about her beauty that completely ignored everything else she had earned and accomplished in her career. At panels and industry discussions, she started to notice a clear pattern in how she was treated compared to the men around her. Her insights and comments were interrupted constantly. What she said was brushed aside as if it didn't matter. Other men in the room were introduced as visionaries and great thinkers. She was introduced as delightful, charming, and radiant. Once, after being cut off and interrupted repeatedly during a roundtable discussion, Goldie stood up and said calmly that she had said what she needed to say. Then she simply walked out of the room. To people on the outside looking in, Douglas seemed like a perfect gentleman from another era. To Goldie, he represented something much more harmful and corrosive. He represented a system that praised women for how they looked while quietly ignoring their authority, their intelligence, and their contributions. She later told a friend in confidence that you can be #1 on the call sheet for a movie and still feel like you're just decoration. There was no public fight between them and no headline-making drama. There was just a deep, permanent discomfort that never went away. Goldie maintained warm relationships with people in the industry who treated her as an equal. But with Douglas, distance always remained. This wasn't out of anger. It was out of clarity about who he was and what he represented. By the time Goldie Hawn reached her late 70s, the pattern throughout her career was impossible to deny or ignore. She had never sought out confrontation with anyone. She had never demanded apologies from people who wronged her. What she did instead was draw clear boundaries and honor those boundaries no matter what. Each man on her private list had taught her something important about Hollywood and about protecting herself. Chevy Chase taught her that cruelty can hide very effectively behind comedy and humor. Warren Beatty showed her exactly how power punishes women who dare to reject it. Dustin Hoffman revealed how massive egos disguise themselves as dedication to craft. Bill Murray exposed the real cost of chaos and what it does to everyone around it. Sean Penn reminded her how easily women's sincerity and vulnerability can be mocked and dismissed. Kirk Douglas embodied a legacy that, for all its greatness, never quite made room for her voice to be heard as it should have been. What ties all of these stories together isn't bitterness or a desire for revenge. What connects them is self-respect. Goldie Hawn made a choice throughout her career to protect her peace, her dignity, and her sense of self. She didn't waste energy fighting battles that couldn't be won or trying to change people who didn't want to change. Instead, she simply walked away from situations and people that didn't serve her, and she never looked back. That quiet strength and that ability to set boundaries without drama or spectacle is perhaps the most powerful lesson from her entire career in Hollywood.